Welcome back to the channel, RacerX here, and today I want to put a little video together talking about some of the differences between driving a Mustang and driving, say, a Mopar. As we know, I used to drive, obviously, a Hellcat. Also, I had a Scatpack, and I have to admit that I was really kind of used to the way that those cars drove. I went to the drag strip in those cars all the time, just very familiar with how the Mopars make power, but this beast is entirely different, the way it makes power. And come to find out, I haven't even really been driving the car right. So I want to tell you guys all about that. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. I would appreciate it. And here we go.
T-minus 15 seconds.
So fundamentally, the Mustang really is entirely different than, say, a Hellcat or even a Scatpack would be, in the sense that it's a much smaller displacement engine in this. If you ever looked at a Coyote engine, the heads on them are huge. Obviously, we've got dual overhead cam setup in this particular car, whereas you, in the Mopars, obviously the Hemis, you're not gonna have that. You're gonna have a traditional pushrod type engine, but a bigger displacement on those engines. Obviously, the Scatpack being a 6.4, the Hellcat a supercharged 6.2. Both of those two beasts have a ton of torque down low. This one, not quite so much. As we know, I've talked about it many times, this car really likes to scream up on the highway, especially when you talk about something like a Hellcat. You've got that roots blower or that twin screw blower sitting right on top of the engine there, and of course it forces all that air in basically immediately. It's basically, you know, instant gratification with the Hellcat. And the way you set that car up to drag race, entirely different than you would do this particular Mustang. So it's just one of those things that you've got to kind of get used to. Huge difference in the way you set up the cars and how you drive them. So yes, there are some huge fundamental differences between the Mustang GT and, of course, the Mopars. Obviously, the 6.4 Scat, much larger engine. As I mentioned, that is a push rod. This particular one, 5 liters. So a huge torque difference, right? 420 pound-feet of torque on this, whereas in the Scatpack, it's 475. And the torque comes on much, much stronger. So very different, obviously, when these cars are naturally aspirated. Of course, we know this one is boosted, right? A twin turbo Hellion kit on this thing, and it really moves out, but you do have to wait for the power. It's twin 64 Turbonetics turbos on this thing, so it makes huge power up top. Matter of fact, I'm barely scratching the surface in terms of how much power this can make, because I don't have a built engine and a built trans. But at the end of the day, when I do that, I can really turn this thing up. But I will mention, I have to wait on the power to come in on this, whereas something like a Hellcat with that twin screw blower sitting on it, the power comes in instantaneously. And what happens is it puts me at a little bit of a deficit. So some of you may have seen the track footage of this car, and I raced a 1,000 horsepower Hellcat, and the Hellcat got out on me in the 60 foot because I couldn't leave under boost. And it really caused me to sort of question. I couldn't quite reel him in. I had more mile an hour on the top end, but it just takes a minute for this bad boy to get going. There is a little bit of turbo lag with this setup. So obviously the torque difference up front, naturally with the Mustang, and then of course coupled by the fact that it takes a minute for my power to come on, definitely makes for an interesting setup on this. So yeah, this is my very first Mustang that I have ever owned, and I really am still learning the car. So as with anybody that's kind of getting into a new platform, it takes a minute, right? You've got to just sort of figure out how the car likes to be set up and how it likes to be driven, and then you have to take your individual application, whether it's still naturally aspirated, turbo, supercharged, whatever, and you sort of have to adapt how you drive the car based on those factors. And of course, this thing, as I mentioned already, doesn't really want to come out of the hole compared to the much larger Hemis, even though it is much lighter, but there are ways to kind of fix that. So I actually called Hellion, my good buddies over at Hellion Power Systems. That's obviously the kit that's on this car. And he actually told me something very interesting, because this car is tuned by Palm Beach Dyno. He said, listen, you know, what RPM are you actually leaving at? I told him it was driving me crazy that I would go to race people and that they were always getting out on me because I had to wait for my power to come in. And obviously, you know, there are pros and cons with every type of a boosted application. And he said, well, listen, what RPM are you actually leaving at? And I told him, you know, on the track, I was trying to drive it like a Mopar. I was trying to drive it and leave about, you know, 1,800 to 19, you know, maybe even 2,000 RPM, stall it up and leave that way. And he said, no, you need to stall it up much higher. The car can hold it. So that's something I need to try next time at the track. The other thing that he told me is, like, when you're roll racing the car, I was leaving at like, 4,500 RPM, which I thought was perfect. That's what I used to leave at with the Hellcat, the Scatpack, and most of the other cars that I've driven, including the Camaros, just about everything. But this particular car, he said, you need to rev it up to 6,000 RPM.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Let it get to 6,000 and then nail it. And you'll be amazed how much faster those turbos come on and how much harder that power comes in. So I'm going to go give it a little try and see if that really is the case. Because it seems crazy to have to leave at 6,000 RPM in this thing. But it's a different animal altogether. Now, I do kind of want to mention something just really quick. Like when you compare this to, say, like my Hellcat, which had a really nice trans tune in it, that car basically shifted out somewhere at like 65 or 6,600 RPM. That was actually taken up a fair amount from the factory shift points, and that car ran really, really well. We saw it ran like 940s. That's pretty good for a big four-door sedan with no nitrous or anything, just pulleys and basically fuel and a tune. But this car, just completely different animal altogether. Palm Beach Dyno has this thing shifting out in sixth gear at almost 8,000 RPM. That is insane to think about, because obviously if they're asking me to nail it at 6,000 RPM in the Hellcat, I would have come right up on the shift instantaneously, like immediately. So it just made no sense to do that. So I have to remember I have a little bit of extra room to work in this car on the top end of the RPM band, which is where this thing really makes all of its power anyway. So it's such a weird thing to think about. Now, as with most cars, I do want to kind of point this out, that it is really important to understand kind of how the car drives and where the power comes in, and kind of where to hit things in the RPM band. You have to understand how to downshift in these things, especially in this one. Obviously, you had the Mopars that are 8 speeds. Those ZF transmissions are fantastic, but even the downshifting is different in this car, because here we have a 10-speed transmission. So you downshift it to a completely different spot to hit, where normally you want to leave it, say, 60. It's a completely different gear, a completely different spot to shift it down to. So you can see I'm downshifting now. That's 7, that's 6, that's 5. And see, we're not even at 5,000 RPM yet. We're still not in the right spot. So it just takes a little getting used to. Okay, now, traditionally, I was leaving, like I said, about 4,500 RPM. That's basically where I am right now, just kind of slow rolling, and watch as the power comes in. Here it comes, and then here comes the boost. Runs pretty darn good. So, but you can see how it takes just a second for that boost to come in. It's kind of build, and then you hit this huge wave of power. So now I want to try Hellion's technique and take up the RPM a little bit higher. It just seems insane to get this thing going at 6,000 RPM before you even stab it, but we're going to give it a shot. All right, now I want to try Hellion's technique. We got to get this thing up to 6,000 RPM before we go. Oh my gosh, this is insane. Wow, I'm still not there. Oh my gosh, we're almost at 6,000. This is insane. Here we go. Oh wow. Holy crap. Oh jeez. Yeah, I would say that made a difference. That is just crazy for me to think about. I never would have thought to rev this car out that high to go, but he was absolutely right. Look how much faster the power comes in when you just get that extra 1,500 RPMs going. Man, what a big difference. Now, I do also want to make quick mention. I've got the car really on low boost right now, and I'm not trying to go super crazy with it. A nice, perfect day outside here in Dallas, Texas. Nice dry roads, and street tires are on the car because I'm getting ready to go film a different video, so I don't even have the drag pack on the car. So I'm being a little bit careful with it to just not annihilate the gas pedal and just send the tires up in smoke. So the car's doing a pretty good job of staying planted like this, but just a little experiment to show you guys just how different it is to drive something like this than my traditional Mopars that I'm so used to. It's just insane. One more time at a little bit lower speed. Let's see what happens here. Almost 6,000 RPM. Oh, wow. It really does come in nice. So there you have it. That little tip from Hellion worked out fantastic. So another great thing to learn about this particular car. As I mentioned, guys, I'm still learning. I'm still trying to figure it out. If this was a supercharged car, completely different story. The RPM and everything would be changed about the car. So you really have to take your time and learn about your car and learn what it likes and what it doesn't like and what works. And I'm still in the process, but we'll get a lot more track footage here coming up very, very soon. I still love my Mopars and the way those are. Just, you can't set this thing up anything like those. The driving characteristics are just so completely different, but I love it. I love the fact that it's different, and I'm enjoying it just like I enjoyed my Hellcat and my Scatpack when I had those cars. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think about it in the comments down below. I'll catch you on the next one. So until then, RacerX.